Okay, so who knows what's going to happen now? I've purposely tried not to overthink this session, though of course it's been rolling around in my mind for some time, and I've had a brief conversation with you, Nick. So we're going to have this conversation now and see where it might go, and there'll be an opportunity for questions after a break. So if you're online and you'd like to ask questions later, if you can put them into the chat box, and then Michael can read them out to me or us in a little bit. So we're going to have a conversation, and then we thought we'd just take a break. So we'll have a 10 minutes or so break. You'll see around the room here, there's some lumps of art, which is my work, and you'll be able to have a look at those, do whatever you need to do for a few minutes, and then we'll come back in and just have a more open discussion. So that's kind of going to be the shape of the afternoon. So hopefully that's sufficient to get us started. So let's go.
Great. Well, thank you to the Bristol Buddhist Centre and Satya Leela, first of all, for really planting the seed a few weeks ago about the opportunity of another arts cafe. And so I've engaged with the arts cafe quite a lot, and each time it's very unique and different, and this is no exception. And I've also had the opportunity to have some really great communication with Satya Leela, and planning with Satya Leela is always very rich, because you get a little present in your inbox quite often, an idea or a PDF, or a seed that will grow. And one thing that Satya Leela shared with me recently was a PDF of a talk Sangharajka gave in the early 60s, I believe, that actually shows up on the Mitra study course in first year and second year. So it reconnected me with my first year and second year of Mitra, and quite a significant point for my spiritual practice, which is around the connection of the artist with the Buddhist practice. And on a personal level, I have lived as an artist for as long as I can remember, as a musician and as an actor, and any kind of education and further education was always a pursuit of the crafts of theatre, writing, acting, and music. And throughout my whole 20s was living as an artist in London with ups and downs and all kinds of things. And then throughout my 30s, living and working, and still currently, within and for the arts, whether it's art spaces or artists. So whenever these connections are made with my Sangha, or my teachers, or my friends, or my Bhante, it touches me very deeply. So I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to make those connections with myself through Bhadra, who I see as a friend and a teacher and a very experienced artist and Buddhist practitioner. So essentially, we're about to get glimpses into the individual by the very essence of what Buddhism and Sangharajka says about this stuff. And, you know, Bhadra very bravely and kindly put himself in the hot seat to present himself as an artist and an individual. So thank you very much, Bhadra. I'm going to start with the Higher Evolution of Man lecture, which I feel more comfortable with the title Higher Evolution of Human. And this is new ground for me, this connection of artist and Buddhist. So it's fertile for me. And I know that we've talked a little bit about it, and your take as an experienced artist and Buddhist is fascinating. So just to talk about what inspires me around this specific lecture and PDF that Sachilila shared is how the artist, by way of that person's practical living, essentially is also very similar in its practicalities of how a Buddhist practitioner lives. I enjoy the sometimes condensed, boxed descriptions of the artist by Sangharakshita and of the Buddhist. I enjoy making those links, even though they can seem reductive, because living as an artist, which can quite commonly mean an introvert, especially through adolescence and childhood, there has also always been a sense of alienation for me. So I've found comfort in some of those links. However, I can see how they may trigger people. And I just like to just offer a description of this higher evolution of human, which is essentially what quite often Sangharakshita refers to as the purpose of the Buddhist practice of cultivating awareness and consciousness. And as Sachilila said, those higher states are found in witnessing and practicing the arts. And so there's a list, there's a description here by Sangharakshita that says what distinguishes the lower human from the higher human. And he's lists 5 attributes that I find interesting. What distinguishes the lower human from the higher human is, firstly, he says, self-consciousness and awareness. That the artist is existing with an awareness and presence, as is the practitioner. The second description is what Sangharakshita calls true individuality. The third description is the higher human is living by creativity. The next description and fourth description is aloneness. And the final description is by frequent unpopularity. And in the talk, Sangharakshita gives brief descriptions of those links of the artist and practitioner. And so with that as a fertile sort of ground, I'd really like to put to you, Bhadra, what is art?
Oh, that's easy.
To you?
Yeah.
What is your practice and relationship as an artist? And how do those descriptions relate to you as a Buddhist?
Oh. Well, that should only take a couple of minutes to unpack that one. So, what we're going to do for the rest of the afternoon. So, thanks, Nick. So, just generally, just to open the response to that particular talk by Sangharakshita on the relationship between the art and the higher evolution. I have a huge amount of difficulties with that particular talk, which I think are important just to name them. I don't want to sort of make a big deal of it, but I think the whole idea of evolution of, and this kind of notion of different levels of kind of expanding consciousness, and trying to relate that in some sort of evolutionary theory. I find it, well, I kind of feel it's one that it's of its time. I kind of feel it's quite an Edwardian perspective on the spiritual life and culture, civilization. I think I have a lot of difficulty in Sangharakshita describing kind of quite low levels of the human condition being kind of correlated with folk or tribal art. I think that's a very Eurocentric and slightly, I'd say even imperialistic perspective on other cultures, which I really struggle with. I think it kind of lacks an understanding of the nature of art, the artist as maker, and that the whole fantasy of the fine arts being the kind of highest articulation of what it is to be an artist, I find, I have to say, quite distasteful. So for me, I think we have to somehow separate out the sort of the products from the process of creating art. I think that's very important. I think it's so what do I mean by that? I think I'm just going to pause a moment, because what happens is that I'm really wanting to resist going into abstractions. I've been thinking a bit around this territory and wanting to kind of be able to sort of be, I suppose I want to kind of try to stay as grounded as possible in here and now, rather than sort of going into these lots of abstract theories that I have, and but it'd be kind of, I think, somehow more helpful in terms of Buddhist connecting art to Buddhist practice, to try to sort of ground it in this being here in some way.
And when you said the products,
yeah,
because that sounds quite grounding, but is that the grounds that might be abstract to you? Because that's what.
Well, I think the I suppose to me the products, the artistic products, are simply kind of husks. They're the remnants of an experience of the artist, the practicing artist. In a way, they're important and they can be helpful for others to kind of get some kind of way into something that product is kind of pointing towards. But I suppose for me as a Buddhist practitioner, what I'm more interested in is what is the process of being an artist. That is what, in a way, the product, in the sense of those, you know, what comes out of it is secondary.
Right.
So similarly, I'd say it would be like me trying to, we don't talk about meditation as these kind of products. We talk about the process of meditating and how we work with meditation. And I think it's the same with art. We can talk to some extent about, you know, what products might appear or emerge in that space, but actually the main thing is the way we engage and participate in the making experience. I don't know if that helps in terms of separating that out a bit.
It does, and that's not abstract. That's connecting me with a lot of practicalities that I've glimpsed practicing Buddhism, and presence, I guess, is what we're saying. A presence and a commitment to the process.
Yes,
and
definitely.
letting go of this aspiring for some kind of end product.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think to me that's really important as well, as Satchleela knows, I'm very much my kind of bias in practice is very much towards trusting the emergent, what is arising, here and now in between us, but more, and the idea of somehow that we kind of create conditions, but actually we still can't ever know fully what will arise in those. All we can do is set up the conditions. I hope that's kind of clear that that's what we're doing in Buddhist practice generally. So if we're trying to sort of head towards, we've got to achieve, the first jhana in this sit, or we're a hopeless meditator, we in a way we're kind of we're stuffed, aren't we, basically? So we have to, we may kind of we may work to create the conditions, but actually if we can't actually force a particular experience into being, just like we can't force a particular shape of art into being. And I find that a very exciting kind of quality to engage with, not just through art, but in practice generally. As Sangharakshita is describing, we're trying to bring something in, give something form, which has to be constantly reiterated. Wherever we have to use the culture, our cultural references, our own sort of personal references, to try to articulate or try to bring into being this instinctual, responsive knowing. But we can't predetermine what that's going to look like. I mean, I know earlier in my art practice, when I first got involved in Buddhism, I was trying to paint Buddhist pictures, and that was just such a dead end, It's in the sense that all you can do there is, in a way, simply, well, not simply, but in a way, you're just kind of going through somebody else's routine. And it takes quite a lot of time and patience to make that representation something that really speaks and is alive in the sort of engagement. And I think that's quite a sort of an interesting kind of dynamic. I suppose it's that we do need form. So we need, in terms of sitting practice, we need to be able to establish our posture. We need to be able to attend to our experience fully. But that's it, in a way. We then have to start to engage with what's actually starting to arise and emerge into that space.
What I'm leaning towards now, because what's really interesting about what you're saying is I'm listening, and sometimes I don't know if you're speaking about meditation or about your process as an artist.
Good.
That's wonderful. And so what I'm feeling, I would like somebody else was lucky enough to sit here to ask is how what you're saying now could possibly be played with around ethics.
Okay.
And if that's too abstract, then let me know. But it just popped up, because I find that living as a Buddhist practitioner, that actually off the cushion, the most creative I can be is in interaction with a very, shall we say, strange world, and how to respond ethically. And I find the challenges quite frequent.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of ethics, I think what we're trying to do with ethics is create a bit of an open space in which to evaluate our responses. So if we're just in reactive mode, we'll just be kind of following through on some habitual rut of responses. Whereas if we bring ethics into the situation, we're necessarily having to bring more awareness and sensitivity to what's driving our kind of our responsiveness. Where is this response coming from? Is it coming from the heart, or is it coming from a kind of desire to manipulate, control, resist? And just those sort of qualitative experiences are very much can only really be known by creating space within those experiences as they start to kind of come into form.
Within a framework, because
Yes.
we do have the
Well,
precepts.
well, we have the precepts, yes. So we're kind of evaluating our responsiveness, but it's in relationship to this, to form. But you know, the gut response might be, well, not particularly skillful or helpful. I was kind of toying with the idea of kind of opening that up into an actual experience, but the experience that comes to mind would be slightly embarrassing. So I'm not sure about this one.
We'll hold that then. Maybe
Yeah.
hesitation is your friend.
Yeah.
But hold that. Because now what you've allowed me to connect with is actually, if as an artist, there's an invitation to be open and to see what comes and to be responsive in creative, aware ways.
Yeah.
So that the form is no longer the focused outcome, but it's just something that arises. Much like in meditation, I'm now visualizing and remembering, like you, experiences where it's a dance
Definitely.
between reality, well, what's being presented in the moment, and
Yeah.
the response, the creative response within it. So I really appreciate that avenue. And while we're sort of in this realm of well, theory, I guess, and you mentioned that when you were practicing Buddhism in the early days, you were drawn to paint Buddhist imagery. So is that's telling me then that you were an artist before you identified as a Buddhist, is that right?
Oh yeah.
And I know that you studied art from 1970 to 1977 at Maidstone, an art degree.
Yeah.
And so, and also that you wrote a thesis.
Yeah.
And that thesis is quite similar today as it was in 77. Is that what it was?
77? Yeah, 77. Yeah.
77. And is it just a question of what you're saying now is very similar to that, or how would the language have differed? Because I guess that would have been the language of the artist.
Yeah.
Because you weren't a Buddhist practitioner at the time, were you?
No. So that's quite a big kind of territory. So it will give me an excuse really to actually, I'd like to sort of just give a bit of backdrop to my getting involved in Buddhism, actually. I think that's kind of an important part of the story, really. So, where to start? So I was brought up by two artists. So my parents were beatniks. So beatniks sort of pre-hippies. So they were kind of trying to experiment, find new ways of living. So we lived in a house, quite a derelict house in the middle of a field in Suffolk in the 50s, which had no running water, no electricity, and lots of nettles surrounding the house. Anyway, it was a paradise. And my father spent a lot of his time painting. He was a landscape painter, and he spent a lot of his life, most of his life really, painting ditches. So he was really into ditches and marshes. You know, on the Suffolk coast, you have these amazing kind of marshes, these kind of shapes that just emerge out of the reeds. And he was just completely absorbed in these shapes. And as a kid, we would get, my memories, it was always kind of a bitterly cold day. We get thrown in the back of this minivan, me and my three sisters, and dragged off to this desolate beach so he could go off to the marshes, and he'd leave us with a page out of his sketchbook and a stick of charcoal, and while he went off and wandered into the marshes to draw and paint. Anyway, so he was painting ditches, and my mother spent all her time painting clouds and sky. So in Suffolk, you get these very big skies, and just these fantastic kind of quite big paintings, but with just skies. And then the kids, we were in the midst of that, which was complete chaos, I have to say. So I was I was brought into life as really sort of the world of the artist, really. So it was kind of completely kind of in my being, really, to be in that world. But what happened for me when different bits of the story, but probably the bit that would be worth mentioning is that when I was about 16, I was standing in a cornfield trying to paint this. It was a beautiful summer's evening. It had this incredibly strong shadow from this single oak tree, this shadow coming across this cornfield. And I was trying to kind of capture it. But something about this shadow moving around through this cornfield, in that moment, as I was trying to capture that in some ways, I knew that I was going to die. And that opening into the reality of death just changed my life, really, quite literally. I mean, I think it was a kind of, there were other things happening around the edges of it, but that was a central kind of, that knowing of death in my kind of cellular structure was a very significant moment. And so in terms of those qualities of the artist, you know, I suddenly became very alone as a human being, because all around me, people seemed to be enjoying their lives and having a great time. And I was kind of, how can you do this? Don't you know you're going to die? And there was something very kind of, you know, isolating about that reality somehow. And at parties, I'd always be that poor, dreadful person that would, you know, I'd be cornering somebody in the kitchen and having these ludicrous, or not ludicrous, they're obviously very meaningful kind of conversations in the kitchen whilst everybody else was having a great time. There's a bit of nodding of heads going on. Oh dear. So there's something about that art, I think it does kind of open me, and I imagine others, you know, we have this experience that there's something about that process of making that does open us to how things really are in some way. So, so that opening, it then took me quite a number of years through the whole of my kind of art school career to try to work a way of how to sort of come into relationship to that. And certainly, so what happened for me was that I really wanted to be a Christian. I would have, because for me, the culture is so rich, these incredible buildings, these cathedrals, this imagery, icons particularly. I just loved all that stuff. But for me, I could never really get on with the fact that I was deemed to be a sinner. There was something about that which I found deeply, you know, I was giving myself hard enough a time as it was, without it being kind of compounded by some external messaging. So I had to find some other way. I tried Christian mysticism, and obviously I was engaged with lots of different artists. And I had the good fortune that I had a tutor when I was at art school who really sort of took me under his wing and introduced me to a lot of people. But one of the things that really kind of shocked me was that he showed me this, it was a poet. Unfortunately, I can't remember who he is now. But I was introduced to the writings of this poet who created these beautiful, incredible poems. And so we went to see him in Notting Hill, and he lived in utter squalor. He was complete alcoholic. He was just sitting in this chair by a gas fire, and all around the chair it was just completely filthy because he just ate in that chair and drunk in that chair. And the whole room was just full of books, but it was absolutely squalid. And yet in amongst it, he was creating these beautiful words. And I just thought, that can't, you know, there's something kind of not right there that doesn't kind of gel for me. And it also, similarly, it did reflect my own experience of when I was painting, I'd get into these very blissful states, particularly when I could feel a painting coming to some sort of conclusion. I'd get into this kind of ecstasy really. But then the rest of my life was a complete mess. I mean, it was very, very painful period of my life actually. I got together with a girlfriend who became the mother of my first two children. And really, we should have split up years before we did. And so it was quite an uncomfortable period. Anyway, that's probably a bit of an aside. Kind of where I'm starting to ramble into my own kind of narrative. So I'm hoping this is something sort of vaguely interesting to just trying to sort of connect it back to, what takes us from being kind of first of all, I suppose, what is it? I think I believe that we all get kind of broken out of some kind of paradise in some way by some event. And that from there on, we're having to sort of try to work out how to sort of build a relationship to that experience. And for me, and many others, it seems that art seems to be a really important means to kind of work with that. Well, we talk about it as the womb, don't we? That's the kind of one of the language we have for this sort of territory.
But what I'm hearing you really eloquently share is that there is the process of creating art.
Yes.
And then there is a way of being an artist. And that there are times in your life, and you also noticed in other artists, especially the poet that you
Mm.
mentioned, where there was a difference between being creative in your life and being
Yeah.
creative on your canvas or your page.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
what I'm hearing you allude towards now is that as a practitioner of Buddhism, there is no separation.
No. I mean, that's why I went towards Buddhism, because I was desperate to find a way of how can I bring together this bliss of creativity and the pain of human relationship. How can I kind of bring these two worlds together? And Buddhism, I mean, not Buddhism as such, but meditation initially. I mean, all this kind of wacky Buddhist imagery. What was that all about? But you know, but certainly the practice of meditation, I could see straight away this was an important doorway into resolving or being able to hold these apparent polarities. So
Well, that brings us quite nicely to recent, present practices of yours, because you've just returned from a 10-day retreat at Bhadra.
yeah, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
wonder if, you know, bringing us
Right up to,
yeah,
yeah,
how that
definitely.
was.
I thought it was a fantastic retreat, and what it did, it reiterated, I think, for me. So, as I mentioned earlier, so I have my father as the ditch dweller, and my mother as the sky dweller. And for me, and this retreat particularly, spent a lot of time trying to hold those two worlds in close relationship to each other. So Paramananda, who was leading the retreat, spent a lot of time getting us to really feel and know the earth beneath us and really build that connection to the earth and build the connection to the sky in a very kind of experiential way. And then suggesting that the heart sits between, and the breath sits between those two experiences of earth and sky. So how can we open into that heart space, or what is the effect of opening into that heart space? And what it seemed to do was that, and he was inviting us into, is that when you open into the heart space, what you're doing, you're connecting earth and sky and world. So you have this vertical axis of earth and sky, and then a horizontal axis of world. And what I found very heartening and encouraging was that Paramananda, and kind of coincides with my own experience, is that to recognize that where we get caught is imagining that we are somehow, we've got our own little individual spiritual life, our own little individual world going on, where actually we're completely interpenetrated by the world. We're utterly, inextricably bound up in the world. And that is somehow very relieving, to come into just being here in the world, not trying to kind of manipulate or control or transcend into some other place, but simply to really come home, to be right here in this experience and respond from that kind of immediacy of being. So one of the beautiful things that we were doing there was that we had the shrine room on two sides of the shrine room, and we were doing these mantras. So we would be we'd be calling the mantra across the room, offering it to the people on the other side of the room who would just be sitting and receiving it, and then they would call the mantra back, to us and we would receive it. So there was this kind of dance between us, which I found very kind of nourishing. And we were encouraged to consider our own practice as that we are practicing primarily for others. So our own attempts to stay in awareness, stay in relationship to ourselves, was to facilitate others' opening, which I kind of find that's really exciting. It's not that, because it seems to be that one's heart is open to others, then a lot of the dross, a lot of the grip and the binding that I can get caught into, it just hasn't got any foothold, really. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody else. Just looking around, just checking that people are thinking or where people are at. So yeah, I'd say that's where I am at the moment, and I find it, I suppose that's why I'm very keen as a chair of a Buddhist center. I mean, what an opportunity, what an incredible gift to have this opportunity to help facilitate collective practice, a collective experience of community, of Sangha, knowing that we really don't have a clue what we're doing. I mean, what we're trying to bring into being here will be utterly new, as it has to be, for it to be living. It has to be re-articulated, as Sangha is describing, this sense of we're constantly reiterating the living Dharma. It has to be. If we're simply replicating, it becomes just shells of practice, really. And I think that's, I'm really continually excited by that possibility, or excited by the not knowing. And I know that is challenging. I mean, it's challenging for me. I find it quite stressful, but also I have a lot of faith and confidence in that as well at the same time. So it's quite a dynamic edge that, because of course, in a way, I can't deny that form is utterly crucial to running a Buddhist center. We have to have a program. The fact that you have turned up here today is because we thought about it and planned it out. It's not just some random event. So it's quite an edge to try to sort of work on, but an important edge. And I think that's the same, coming right back to art and the relationship between art and practice. It's very much this sense of that is an edge. We have our capacities, we have our training in whether it's music, theatre, fine art, whatever it is. We have that sort of training. But it's how to sort of lean into that in a way that we can hold it light enough for something new to emerge through that, rather than simply replicating what's been before. So that's kind of, for me, that's what I find an exciting edge. And just to bring it back to meditation, I suppose that's what I think about meditation. It's how can we ensure that when we sit on the cushions, we can use the form, but not in a way to constrain us, but simply to kind of create the container for whatever new experience is going to arise into the space. I think that, again, it's sort of a very important aspect of practice.
Well, I'm aware that we've given people in the room and people online more than enough to possibly trigger a few questions but also that I'm unaware of the time and that a break might be at hand. What do you think?
I'm happy to have a break. I quite like, I kind of got a need to read a poem, actually. Which kind of, what's that about? But there you are. I'm going to do it anyway. I can find it. So this is called Lost by David Wagner. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you.